Hello and welcome to another episode of Climate Watch. I'm Fei Fei. Today I'm thrilled to welcome two great thinkers of our time, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm of Yale University. Both of them are senior lecturers and research scholars at Yale University with appointment at the School of the Environment, the Divinity School, and the Department of Religious Studies. Mary Evelyn specializes in Asian religions, in particular Buddhism, Taoism, and also Confucianism. Together with John, she co-directs the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, the largest international multi-religious project of its kind. And John's research focuses on indigenous traditions and their ecology wisdoms. Unlike Mary Evelyn, he brings deep insights into how religious and spiritual traditions shape our relationship with the natural world. Among their many contributions, they organized 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard and collaborated on Journey of the Universe, a multimedia project that includes a book, an Emmy Award-winning film, a podcast series, and online courses, which we'll delve deeper later in this episode. And their work invites us to see our connection to Earth in a profound and inspiring way, which I think has tremendous significance in today's world when we are facing so many challenges in dealing with climate change, and especially how we view our position in this changing world. Hello, Mary Evelyn and John. Great to have you on the show.
It's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for the invitation.
I know you've been touring around China for about a month now. How was the trip? Can you tell us more about who you've met, what you've saw, what new inspiration probably popped during that trip?
It's been a great inspiration. We've been coming for many decades, but this was a particularly vibrant trip. Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Shanghai, Hangzhou, Liangzhu, and Chengdu, now Beijing. But the primary thing was Liangzhu in certain ways.
Well, I feel also the opportunity to be here in China and to extend our citizens' diplomacy and to help to renew the friendship between U.S. and China. It's very important for us to be aware and signal that if all of the weighty rhetoric that's in the news today, there's still face-to-face friendship. And this particular trip, as you know, we're both academics and we're accustomed to meeting universities and faculty and students, and we have on this trip been speaking in those settings. But also we've been meeting people in the business world and people in other concerns, governance, state officials, and instances of eco-villages and organic farms. So it's really wonderful to meet these diverse communities.
It's so great to hear you, especially when we come to people-to-people exchanges between two cultures, two countries. That's always the jam when it comes to communication, cross-cultural communication. And I'm very interested about your trip to Liangzhu, first of all, because it was a 4,000 or 5,000 year old civilization once lost during the course of time, but now we've rediscovered it. And both of you studied ecology and also values like religions and philosophy for decades. What sort of messages do you think you get from visiting this old civilization?
Well, it's very impressive to see the oldest Neolithic site in China and one of the oldest in the world in Liangzhu. And the excavation, the research, the archaeology is tremendously impressive, as is the museum, which brings it forward. And this is relatively new, the museum and so on. So our understanding is phenomenal about water issues and damming and irrigation and how they had a reverence for water and were trying to prevent overflooding, but creating a vibrant agricultural community. And in addition, they had a tremendous sense of the cosmos and the stars and the relationship of this community to the universe, to Tian, to heaven. So it was on the ground, agricultural, water-based, but also with a reverence for the universe in which they were living.
What about John? You studied indigenous traditions and knowledges also. As Mary Evelyn just mentioned about the concept of cosmos and when the ancient people staring, gazing upon the sky at the stars. Why is that important to today, to us today?
Visiting Liangzhu and first touring through the museum. It's a absolutely beautiful museum, and it's laid out so carefully, and you can enter into it with an understanding, and the cosmological dimension appears very quickly, namely symbols that are expressed either in the pieces of pottery or in status symbols worn by leadership in that particular era. But this attention to the larger cosmos really struck me. It becomes grounded when you go from the museum to the field site, and you begin to see the palace area, the platforms, the burials, and then also the city wall and the waterways that Mary Evelyn was speaking of too. The sense then of cosmological grounding is not simply some abstract feeling, but it's really anchored in the relationship to stars, to local bioregion, and how that bioregion comes into the community itself. So there's so much about Liangzhu that speaks to us in our contemporary search also.
Then after wrapping up your trip to Liangzhu, you pop on a flight to Chengdu, to an eco-village, back to the land, to the earth. And I think also very interesting that eco-village was now built and also gathered a lot of young people currently in China. And this clash between an old civilization, an ancient civilization really, and now to a group of young people. How do you feel about that eco-village trip?
Well, it was quite extraordinary. And, I see it actually as more in continuity and complementary rather than clash even, because they're also trying to orient themselves to the rituals of the seasons, like people in Liangzhu, the solstice in summer and the equinox in spring where we are now and so on. So there's this sense we orient ourselves to a larger universe, but we ground ourselves in the rituals of planting and seasonal cycles and so on. For generations, people in the countryside of China have been doing that, and around the world. But the particular vibrancy is that they are trying to incorporate this ancient wisdom, if you will, with a modern challenge. How do we all find healthy food, nourishing food? And the food there was just so delicious. It's vegetarian, which I am, but it was always served with love and care and concern. The whole village has this deep community feeling, very much inspired by tea. They have tea 3 times a day. It's like a meditation, so nourishing. So much to say, but it was especially encouraging to see the intergenerational cooperation working towards a very vibrant future. It's an amazing place.
How relaxing the working environment to be in.
Yes.
They have like tea 3 times a day,
Yes.
a different tea.
Yes. From the mountains, some of the most delicious tea.
That's nice. What about John?
Well, it was such an interesting experience coming from the archaeological attention to the past in Liangzhu and then going to the eco-village at Xilai. But I also felt the continuity. As you mentioned earlier, I study with indigenous or ethnic peoples, the term indigenous often not being used in East Asia or South Asia or even Africa. So the sense of terminology varies. But the feeling among ethnic peoples, especially in ritual activity, where the past and present can come very close. And generally, it's during a ritual moment when we undertake community activities to celebrate ourselves, renew ourselves. I felt in the eco-village that attention through the tea ceremony and then also through the work that was done, the sense of renewal. And I could sense why young people would be drawn to attend and maybe visit and maybe even stay for longer periods of time. One comparative thought that came to my mind was Liangzhu, we now have a sense of dating 5,300 to 4,300 before the current era. It's very old as a Neolithic rice farming civilization. But I'm also aware that among archaeologists, there's this constant understanding that hunter-gatherers and foragers might very well have come together, and farming started slowly, and then it began to build up. But maybe hunting and gathering or foraging never ended, and so there's this varying identity of what people are doing and where they're moving between what. I felt something similar in the eco-village at Xilai, the sense of very welcoming to visitors to come and see the concern about orange groves and the pesticides, insecticides, and the concern for soil fertility in the face of those practices, and trying to search out new modes of agroforestry, if that term, new ways of growing oranges and maybe even new crops. So some very exciting identity searches and crop searches.
And so if you think about it, it's really not that much of a difference between, for example, people living in Liangzhu thousands of years ago with the villagers now in the eco-village. They're all a sort of a community. They're all working together towards a certain goal. So we're thousands of years apart, something never changed.
Exactly. And if Liangzhu was a sustainable civilization for 1,000 years, it has something to teach us. And just to come to one of the most important things, sometimes we say values, they're abstract. These are values that have a deep reverence for the land as healthy and for people as healthy. This is as simple as saying health of people and planet go together, because food nourishes us. The water embraces us. So it's all the elements coming together: fresh air, clean water, healthy soil, and a fire that lights up a sense of where we belong in this land. It's very inspiring, both of these ancient and modern examples in China.
Yeah. So that really brings me to the major topic of this episode. It's about, the human's relationship with the nature and how should we look at ourselves in today's world during this environmental or climate crisis. And I know you both studied really ancient wisdoms. For Mary Evelyn Tucker, she studied Asia religions, and for John, he studies indigenous traditions. So I want to pop the question first to Mary Evelyn about your studies with Asian religions, about Buddhism like Taoism, and also more specifically Confucianism. And I've never thought that I can draw a link between the philosophy of Confucianism with ecology. But you've done that for the past 4 decades, 40 years. So how did you firstly draw the link between a philosophy with ecology?
Such a great question, thank you. I came to Japan in 1973-74, very disillusioned after the 60s in the US. And what Japan and Asia began to open up to me was a very different, open, breathing spirituality, that things were alive, the living earth community. And at that time, I traveled through Hong Kong and Macau and Taiwan and Singapore and through Asia. And our teachers had already come to China in 1948, Thomas Berry and Ted DeBerry at Columbia and Fordham. They began to teach these traditions. And that was a great inspiration to us. And when I was in Japan, I loved Buddhism. It's the sense of the gardens and the beauty of the gardens and the sense of being in the present mindfully. But I began to realize what was inspiring the traditions and the countries of East Asia was community, society, belonging, a sense of the public good, education. And this is Confucianism. It's the cultural DNA of all of East Asia, really. And then as we began to do these conferences, which we can talk about at Harvard, I realized because Confucianism has an explicit sense of the human being in, like this table, being in concentric circles, that the cultivation of the person affects the whole, out from family and society and friends, nature, and the cosmos itself. This connection can inspire us to work on behalf of the community of people, but the community of nature, the whole community. So much more to say, but we know Confucianism, like all traditions, has problems, but it has promise. We know it has its difficulties sometimes with women, as all religions do, but there's also changes. It can be autocratic, but it can also have a sense of liberating.
Right now in China, we're also seeing a lot of scholars now looking back at Confucianism, and there are also like different interpretation of what Confucianism is and what Confucius said thousands of years ago. But now they start to look back at these theories and thinking, how can we utilize these theories in today's world? And more specifically, I think when it comes to climate, how can a 5,000 or 2,000, 4,000 year old philosophy help us to face the challenges we have today? I mean, it seems like two very distant concepts. And how do you weave them together?
Mm-hmm. It's, again, a very fine question. And we felt, those of us studying Asia, especially in the late 70s and 80s, and we thought, wow, as a country as sophisticated as this begins to modernize, there's going to be unintended consequences for the environment, right? And India and China are the most important countries in terms of this rapid modernization process. And so we felt we're at a period now where we have the scientific knowledge, IPCC reports, we have policy reports, we have the even new economics, green economics and GDP. We have technology where China is leading on solar and wind and EV cars and so on. We have law. But, we met in 2008, the Minister for the Environment. He said, we can't enforce the environmental laws in China because we don't have an environmental culture, a mindset, a consciousness. And that's true in the West as well. This is relatively new because most of our cultural traditions were people-to-people relations, how we treat people. But he also was working, at the same time we were working at Harvard, on how do Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism bring forward an ecological ethics. That's what's been missing in the larger global dialogue. So yes, it may sound abstract, but as you've mentioned, people in China are already thinking about this in universities, at the Chinese Academy of Social Science, and so on. It's like Wang Yangming, knowledge and action, principles and practice. We have a lot of the practices now, but the principles will give that juice, that energy to bring it forward with a sense, yes, this belonging to the earth community is something very ancient in China and yet needs new modern expression. So just to conclude, a huge question. What we did at Harvard was, with all these traditions, we said, let's retrieve, let's reevaluate for modern circumstance, and let's reconstruct. So it's not just saying, take this text and just jump over to modernity. It has to be rethought. And that's what this tradition has done throughout. So many commentators, so much thought. Wang Yangming and all the commentators, right?
Yeah. Wang Yangming is getting traction these days in China as well, especially with this major principle of 知行合一, the knowing. You have to have the knowing and the action at the same time.
Right.
And then I think about today's climate actions. Yes, we need actions, but sometimes we're not really sure about the principles or the logic or the science behind. What's the best way to do? We can't just stop the action and think about these things first. But more, I think, right now, especially among a lot of Chinese scientists, the common consensus that they have is that we have to have these two things together, to have the actions alongside thinking about the values, thinking about the logics or the science behind it that we haven't figured out yet.
Yes. And that's a new conversation that you're pointing to very clearly. It's extremely important because I think the scientists for many years, if not decades, thought their models, their data, their presentations would make the changes possible. But the IPCC reports never had the human element until very recently. Never said humans are the cause. It just gave the reports. It never said we must do something, because science does not have an advocacy dimension. They're trained to be very objective. So many of them are alarmed at why we haven't made faster changes, even though the knowledge is there. Because basically we're guided by these deep values, even unconsciously. This cultural DNA in China, how you treat your parents, how you treat your friends, how you treat your teachers. So taking this DNA and bringing it to its next stage of saying, how can we really have this feeling that we are not isolated, we're not alone, we don't have to be in despair, we belong to a living Earth community. We can feel that even here in Beijing, where I believe 49% of the city now has parks and trees and flowers. It's incredible. So this still may sound abstract, but what I'm trying to say is as our consciousness changes, that we belong here, that we can feel the freshness of spring and flowers and transformation, we can make the transformative action. It gives us the energy, not just the knowledge, but the energy for the action.
Exactly. I think the energy is definitely the foundation to drive the action, especially considering not only here in China, but around the world, among young people, they have this anxiety. I think I've saw studies showing that young people, young generations have this anxiety about this future with climate change as the backdrop. They're anxious, they're nervous, but they don't really know how to address this issue. And now we are seeing a lot of trends going back to their old traditional wisdoms. And I think that's an area that John had dedicated for years is indigenous wisdoms. And with seeing more people going back to their indigenous traditions, and what do you think they're looking for? And will they be getting what they want eventually?
Would you allow me to just make a comment about Confucianism also? Because having traveled with Mary Evelyn, I often hear her discussions with other scholars, and I just wanted to interject this point. Regarding the anxiety that we find among students, among older people also, anxiety for the future of our shared environmental life, that the perspective of Wang Yangming is very interesting, as you pointed out, this relationship of knowledge and practice. And some Confucian scholars make a very appreciative critique of Wang Yangming, and I would be very appreciative. I find his appeal because he brings us into a deep empathy for things. He would say, when a tile falls off a roof and breaks, there's something calls out of us. We feel a sympathy for that, and it's very appealing, but it's also very self-oriented or involuted, interior-oriented. And so knowledge and practice can become very inner-directed. And I see that when I think of the anxiety of young people, that often they're directed to see their anxiety as very self-contained. Whereas in the Confucian tradition also, the Jushi schools and those that followed it were very heavily oriented towards the qi dynamic in the universe, the continuity of being in the universe. And so Du Ming, the Confucian philosopher, will even title a book in that regard. But the sense of the larger universe teaching us about our experience, such as anxiety, and I think that's where Mary Evelyn was going also, about the larger cosmos, so an anthropocosmic understanding rather than an anthropocentric. Maybe we'll talk more about that as we go on.
Yeah.
But going then to indigenous traditions, one of the differences, if that's the correct word to use, I'm not sure if it's a difference between the ancient wisdom of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, and indigenous peoples, these small-scale societies that live in very close relationship with their bioregion, and they seem to cultivate this anthropocosmic perspective. They're looking to the sky, earth, animals for their identity, and the world is speaking to them. And these traditions have endured into the present. And in some instances, we've wanted to make them exemplars or models of humans in the past. And I think that's very problematic to lay that onto Native people because they have constantly been changing. And so we see them sometimes as frozen in their tradition, traditional peoples. They don't change. But of course, we all change. And so Native peoples are also, for example, speaking about justice issues to preserve their language, to preserve their relationship with land. And often all of their religious or spiritual life is oriented towards the survival of the people. It's woven into everything they do. Ultimate meaning can be woven into the way a woman makes a basket, the way a man might carve a canoe. And so I find the word lifeway much more helpful for talking about the spiritual or ultimate values in these small-scale indigenous societies, because lifeway suggests the spiritual is not something removed or over there or done at a certain time. It's woven into the life. And this ultimate meaning or sacred is also cosmological. It's embedded in our relationship with the larger world and with the animals, as I've said before. So in conclusion, when I think of ancient wisdom, I don't think necessarily simply of the teachings of a particular tradition, but the long reach of time that a people have lived in relationship to land and biodiversity, that long reach of time teaches them what the world is speaking about, what the world teaches them. And for our studies, and I know we'll talk about this more, we're interested in the journey of the universe, the long evolutionary history, as part of our story, our modern story.
And since you mentioned about your multimedia project, really, it has a movie, an Emmy Award-winning movie, and also have a book, also a website, podcast, courses around it, talks about the journey of the universe, and you also talk about the concept of anthropocosmos, which can be abstract to some of our listeners and to me as well, because I can't really comprehend how the understanding of the cosmos, the universe, can reflect in my life ways currently.
So we did this in a way to try and answer that question, even though it's a huge and important question. But if we understand now, which our parents and grandparents didn't even understand, that we're part of a 13.8 billion year unfolding process, it's incredible. And that as the universe began to expand in its very early phase, it was just the right movement, not too big, not too small, to allow everything to follow through. So that kind of understanding changes a sense, wow, this is a life-generating universe. But most importantly, to be very practical, the stars, as we say in this film, are our ancestors. And it goes back to what we were talking about in Lianzhu and the eco-village and how we orient ourselves to the heavens throughout all of human history. But the stars are our ancestors because in their explosion, when they go supernova, all the elements are exploded into the atmosphere so that the carbon-based life of us, of plants and everything, actually comes from the stars. So we're related as deep ancestors. And when Zhongsai says in the Western inscription, "Heaven is my father, earth is my mother, and even such a small child as I has a place in their midst." See, that's a deep and profound Confucian understanding. We're part of this universe. And Taoism has all kinds of practices for the body of the person to relate to the body of the universe. You see, the microcosm, macrocosm relations. So it's in Chinese thought, it's in other cultures too. It's a scientific idea of our relationship, but it's also a value of thinking, how do the stars inspire us? And how does the heavens inspire us? Because we're connected to them.
So it's in some sort of way, it's sort of answering the question of who am I, where am I, and my position
Exactly.
in this world, not only on this planet,
Yes.
but probably on a wider scale of the universe.
Exactly.
Do you think we can get the answers eventually?
It's, again, interesting to image myself back into the museum at Liangzhu and to see the tools that were developed in relationship to a certain expertise of farming or an expertise of hunting or craft making or governance. And in all of these activities, it's possible to say the human, the anthropos, to use the Greek term, the human is identified with certain crafts or activities, and we begin to specialize in those activities. And to come forward into the modern time across the many millennia, the thousands of years, specialization has begun to seize hold of the image of the human. And so we say our economy is what makes us human. And so you have to have more, acquire more, or some might say governance and power. That's what makes us human. And the whole drive of the human is to be powerful in your person. And so these anthropocentric understandings have made us powerful. They have developed economic systems that are capable of what we see around us, and they are magnificent in their own way. But we also yearn for something that we see in our ancestors, and I see also among Indigenous people and their life. There's attention to the interior, the deepness within. And what's so interesting is the interior is not limited to the human. So an Indigenous elder may hold a stone in her hand, and she may talk about the interior of the stone as talking to me. And in our modern society, that seems totally irrational.
Yeah.
We don't have any proof that a stone talks. But she may say, in my tradition, we have proof. We have a sense that stones have a story. One of the most interesting exchanges we have had in the Journey of the Universe project is with the geological community. Geologists, when they hold a stone in their hand, geologists say, this stone has a story. It was formed over a long period of time. And that's an anthropocosmic response to the world around us. And I think we search now for connection of deeper meaning to the world around us. And that's how I would describe my usage of the word anthropocosmic.
And if I can just add to that, thank you, John, that what unifies this vast, unfolding, magnificent, mysterious universe is feeling once again our connection to it, because that's what's been broken. So our ancient wisdom from Confucian, Taoism, Buddhism, and indigenous traditions has that connection. But what is it in the modern period that can restore that? This is where I think the notion of qi, of matter energy, of vital force, that's the unifying dimension of the whole thing. And again, in the West, we've separated matter here, spirit here, mind here, body there. Mind and heart are one. Shin. And we are the mind and heart of the universe. That is an amazing idea. That's our deepest identity. And the qi, this becomes very practical, right? It's an extraordinary thing that we can actually experience through, I do qigong, tai chi. What is tai chi doing? It's putting us in touch with movements in the earth community, right? And TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is helping our qi to move for the flow of things. So it's very practical how we can restore our own health, but how we can also experience the qi all around us, animals, plants, and so on.
Can I ask Mary Evelyn, do you think qi is similar to what people talk about as the quantum world?
It could very well be. Yes, I think that's to be explored. It has been in the Tao of physics with Frioff Capra and so on and so forth. I think at the quantum level, we are seeing the emergence of qi in these different forms. And I think everyone, even in the West, we now understand why Tai Chi is so powerful. Why do people want to do it? Why do they want to have acupuncture or TCM, even in the West? So this is, again, a practical, embodied understanding of how we belong to the whole, our health, earth health, universe continuity.
Because my mom actually is a TCM practitioner. She studied traditional Chinese medicine.
Nice.
And there has been debates now in China about, what's the scientific foundation of traditional Chinese medicine? Because you don't have experiments in the labs. You don't have trials like what the current modern medicine would normally do. And they have 3 trials in labs first, and then on animals, and then on a small group of humans. But traditional medicines doesn't have that. How can you prove it's effective? And my mom's answer to that is that TCM never looks at the symptoms itself. It looks at your whole system of your body. Maybe now you are experiencing ache in this body part. That reflects something wrong with the whole system. And when we're talking about curing your symptoms or your illness right now with TCM, is about balancing your system, looking at your system, how to balancing that, and considering also the environment you are living in, thinking about the environment you are originally from. Maybe now, especially in today's world, you move to another city that has completely different environment from what you grew up in. And that also affects a lot of the symptoms and illness and uncomfortableness that you experience. And so that's something I think current scientific studies aren't able to tap on exactly what is going on with that. And I sort of resonate with the stone talking theory as well, because we have a lot of ethnicities here in China also have similar philosophy about the heaven is speaking to me, the wind is sending me some sort of messages. And from a modern perspective, that sounds nonsense. Like the wind is talking, what are you talking about? But now thinking about it, it's not in a human language that we can comprehend. It's something else. Maybe in ancient tribes from a certain ethnicity, they were unable to explicitly to articulate what sort of messages they get and what sort of system they believe in, but maybe in a very poetic way, because a lot of the theories are passed on with poems. And that sounds beyond comprehension for modern systems. And that's something that we can start to rethink. And maybe that can contribute to our understanding with the planet and also what's going on with the climate and the environment currently.
Our teacher, Thomas Berry, used to say to us, we modern people, we think in terms of systems. And if we are intelligent, we talk about systems interacting with one another. But indigenous people, he would say, live in a universe. And I think what he was after is something along the lines of what you've just described, the whole, the sense of the wholeness. And so systems interacting to form a whole, indigenous people are constantly seeking to understand their position in relationship to the whole. And that's a rather challenging idea, I believe, in our current life way.
What you have said so clearly and eloquently is exactly what we feel. In fact, our whole work is in this direction in a certain way. So thank you for your insights. And I've been doing Qigong, and we've been doing Chinese massage with a woman who lives in New Haven, who's from Hangzhou, and for 30 years. And I'm 75, I take no medicine, and the proof is in the healing capacity of your mother and other practitioners and so on. So, but why Western people can't understand this well is because we've made this split between body, mind, spirit, It's all split. And we've made everything materialism, which leads to consumerism, more and more things and more alienation is the point. But as we reconnect, as we heal this incredible split with scientific reductionism, and over here, sort of religions and spirituality, we need new fusion. And we need a deep appreciation for this living earth community that is qi-based. It's definitely qi-based. And I just give one example. What we're doing now is bringing out a website called Living Earth Community, where the science of animal behavior is showing us the intelligence of animals and birds and migration patterns and the connection and communication of trees and so on and so forth. It's huge now. The science is moving in that direction, as well as nature writers. And there's thousands of books and articles now we're going to put up on the website. And people are very excited because it brings us back to that resonance with life and life communities.
Now, you have a website, Earth Community?
It's coming up, the Living Earth Community website. By August, we will lift it out.
We'll link that in the description once it's up. Hold that thought. This is just the first half of our conversation with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm of Yale University. We'll dive deeper into the relationship between humans, nature, and the planet in part 2 of this discussion. If you enjoyed today's dialogue and want to stay updated, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform. You can also reach me at fei.fei@cgtn.com or find me on Substack, where I write the Rivers and Mountains newsletter. Feel free to leave a comment. We always appreciate your feedback. Stay tuned for the next episode.